Sir. Now, friends, our honorable speaker is coming in 5 minutes. But till then, you need to know that this great personality is, and I feel that he should be introduced first before he speaks against you all. So I request past office bearer of Income Tax Bar Association, CA Parth S. Doshi, to introduce today's honorable speaker. Though he has not come, but we can definitely introduce him to the August audience. Parth bhai.
Thank you, Karthikeya bhai. Good afternoon, respected seniors and professional brothers. I shall now take privilege in introducing today's honorable guest faculty and expert in budget analysis, CA Pradeep N. Kapasi sir. He is past president of Bombay Chartered Accountant Society and Chamber of Tax Consultant. He has co-authored various books of which some important titles consist of Search, Seizure and Survey, International Taxation, Fields and Successions, Stamp Duty, etc. Sir is regular contributor of articles in professional magazines and various newspapers. He is also on the editorial board of the Chartered Accountant General, the Chambers General, and BCAJ reference cum diary publications. He has addressed various conferences and seminars for the benefit of tax professionals and tax officials. He was lecturer and visiting faculty at IIM and Jamnalal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies since 12 years. He is a regular tracker and does charitable activities through his initiative called Prayas, which consists of Winter Warmers Drive. Friends, I feel proud to welcome a great personality, CA Pradeep N. Kapasi sir, for his critical analysis on Union Budget 2021. Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Sorry for being late. Yeah.
You late. તમે આપેલા ટાઈમ પ્રમાણે બરાબર છો.
Thank you so much for remembering that. Yeah. Good.
નહીં, તમારે આવતા પહેલા બધી વિધિ અમારી એસોસિએશને પતાવી છે.
ચલો સરસ, બહુ મજાનું કરીને. Very well. So you may let me know, when do we start?
એક જ મિનિટ પ્રદીપભાઈ.
હા. Take your time.
એટલે તમે નથી સાંભળ્યું બધું એટલું થોડુંક હું કહી દઉં.
હાજી કહી દો, ચાલો.
પ્રદીપભાઈ એટલે ખૂબ નમ્ર માણસ, ખૂબ સિસ્ટમેટિક કામ કરનાર વ્યક્તિ, ક્રિસ્ટલ ક્લિયર એમના મનમાં દરેક સબ્જેક્ટ હોય છે અને ખૂબ સિનિયર ચાર્ટર્ડ એકાઉન્ટન્ટ. બોમ્બેમાં એમની પેઢી પબ્લિક કબર્સી એન્ડ કંપની સમગ્ર મહારાષ્ટ્રમાં બહુ મોટું નામ ધરાવે છે. પોતે સેવાભાવી પણ છે, આદિવાસીઓમાં ઘણું કામ કરે છે, સોશિયલ પણ ઘણું વર્ક કરે છે. બધા જ કાયદાના જાણકાર, કારણ કે એમને બધા જ કાયદા ઉપર પુસ્તકો લખ્યા છે અને BCA જનરલમાં તો રેગ્યુલર એમના અત્યારે બી આવે છે આર્ટિકલ્સ દર મહિને અને જુદા જુદા વિષય ઉપર. એટલે આવા મહાન વક્તા આપણને મળ્યા, એનો જો યશ જાય તો મારા મિત્ર અરવિંદભાઈ પરીખ જાય છે. એમને મને કીધું કે આવશે જ, હું કહીશ, એટલે મને વિશ્વાસ છે અને એમનો વિશ્વાસ સાચો પડ્યો. મયુરભાઈ તો મારા મિત્ર જે પ્રદીપભાઈ એના મિત્ર છે, એમને એટલું બધું એમનું પ્રેમ હશે તો કે હું બાર પ્લેનમાં આવીશ. આપણે પહેલાં વિચાર વેબિનારના બદલે સેમિનાર કરવાનો હતો. હું આવીશ પ્લેનમાં, જઈશ પ્લેનમાં, સાંજે 4 વાગે આવીને 8 વાગે જઈશ. પણ પછી લાગ્યું કે ના, આટલી બધું આપણે બોલાવવાની જરૂર નથી. પણ પ્રદીપભાઈ અમારું આમંત્રણ સ્વીકાર્યું ખૂબ પ્રેમથી. આજે બધા 5 એસોસિએશનો એના સભ્યો તમારા આભારી છે, ઋણી છે. અને ફરીવાર જ્યારે અમે આવી કંઈક આપણે વિનંતી કરીએ ત્યારે આપ જરૂરથી પધારશો એવી વિનંતી. ફિઝિકલ અમે તમને બોલાવીશું નેક્સ્ટ ટાઈમ.
ચાલો જી, ધીરેશભાઈ, બહુ આનંદની વાત છે. તમે આટલું બધું કહો છો, એમાંથી કદાચ કંઈક પરહેપ્સ મારી કોઈ લાયકાત નથી આ બધું. તમે જે whatever you are saying may not be applicable to me. Well, do we start?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good evening to all of you. See, ladies and gentlemen, and my seniors, and the dignitaries of several associations who have joined this webinar. This perhaps is the first time in so many years of, my being engaged in public address, that I have agreed to speak on budget just within 24 hours. So let's see that I stand up to your expectation, and see that that we deliver, and for whatever we all have gathered, we try to get something. This year's budget is contrary to the expectation on two counts. Finance bill in particular. The first is that all of us had thought that there would be a stiff increase in the levy of taxes, either by way of surcharge or some kind of a COVID-19 cess. None of it has happened. In fact, everyone was expecting that changes, if any, would be in relation to tax rates and surcharge and education cess, and not many changes would be there in relation to the other provisions of the Income Tax Act. And that is where, see, all of us have, been proved wrong, in as much as there are more than 80 changes of significant importance, and therefore it becomes essential for all of us to appreciate these changes instead of concentrating on the rates, because otherwise, as we would see, there is not much of a difference. With this, permit me to share the screen. Yes. Yeah, I'll take some minutes because technology is little concerned. We are going to deal with several aspects today, see, time permitting, of course. And I believe, Diresh bhai, that we are going to close it by 6:15 or 6:30.
6:30.
6:30, right? Yeah. So these are the things which we are likely to discuss. Rates of tax, definitions, and several other things. I have just put it before you. Rates of tax, the first significant thing we need to appreciate is whatever rates which had been specified for assessment year 2020, 21, 22, that is the current year, they had been prescribed by Finance Act 2020, which was approved the previous year. These rates have not been tinkered with. They would be as they were prescribed. And so therefore, for the current year, income taxation, there is no change whatsoever. That's one thing we would keep in mind. As far as AY 22-23 is concerned, whatever had been prescribed by the Finance Act 2020 for the purposes of tax deduction at source, for the purposes of advance tax, and whatever is proposed presently for the purposes of AY 22-23 is the one which is prescribed by 2020. So there would be no change. The special regiment of taxation in the form of Section 115 BAA, BAB, BAC, BAD, all optional regiments would continue to be made available to the assessees. So this is one important thing which we have noticed, that there is not going to be any change as far as the rates are concerned. I have just reproduced the calculations which some of you would like to get into that. You may please look into that. We are not going to discuss these tables, but I thought that it will make my presentation comprehensive. So therefore, I have placed the rates for AY 21-22 as also for 22-23. These are the rates which are effective. Importantly, the special rates which have been provided for taxation of capital gains and taxation of undisclosed sources and income from undisclosed sources, they would continue to apply. There will be no change. Optional rates of taxes just have been listed for your benefit. And there has been an attempt made that in case of individuals, which regiment would be more suitable to you. With this, we come to the first major amendment, which is in the form of a definition. That is the definition of slum sale. Definition of slum sale for the purpose which is contained in section 242C is sought to be amended. Slum sale is, as all of you are aware, that when a slum sale takes place, the capital gains on slum sale is computed as per the provisions of Section 50B of the Income Tax Act. Now, and the computation is somewhat like this, that whatever consideration you receive, that will be reduced by cost of acquisition, which will be equivalent to the net worth on the date of transfer of the undertaking. So this otherwise was simple. And slum sale definition, as was contained in 242, we provided that sale any sale of an undertaking would be treated as a slum sale if it satisfied the conditions. That is, the assets and liabilities have been transferred lock, stock, and barrel. The amendment which has been made is that now, instead of restricting the sale to simply instead of restricting the slum sale to simple sale, now it is provided that all kinds of transfers are covered by slum sale. The reason behind this was that in one of the decisions of 2012 of Bombay High Court, the Bombay High Court take a view that any case of an exchange in a slum sale would not be treated as a slum sale, and in that view of the matter, it perhaps would not be liable to tax at all if the cost of acquisition was not possible to be computed. To do away with this anomaly, it has now been provided that a slum sale would cover all cases of transfer. In short, any transfer by whatever mode, if it is involving slum sales, provisions of Section 50B would apply. This is perhaps one of the important change which is sought to be made, whereunder one of the rulings of a high court is sought to be reversed. The next change is in respect of liable to tax. As you would see that this term is being used in several sections, particularly section 10, section 1023 FE, section 90 and 90A. This term was not defined in the Income Tax Act, and therefore there was a confusion that what would be treated as something which is liable to be taxed overseas. In order to do away with any confusion at a later point of time, now it is so provided that an income which is actually taxed overseas would only be considered to be an income which is liable to be taxed. In other words, there have been jurisdictions in which if an income for which a tax rate is provided, but ultimately no tax is levied because such an income later on is exempted from the provisions of the taxes overseas. In order to do away with such kind of a situation, it has now been provided that it is only when an income is taxed overseas, it will be considered to be an income which is liable to tax overseas. This will have a direct implication on the definition of non-resident and the operations of the DTAA, and therefore at the outset I thought of placing it for your consideration. The next is the definition of a demerger, which is not of a very significance for us, but in short what it provides is that when the PSUs are split up, even if it is strictly not meeting the definition of a demerger under section 219AA, still in such case, this would be considered as a case of a deemed demerger, and therefore, whatever are the consequences of such a deemed demerger would be applicable even in case of public sector undertaking. The next is zero coupon bond. This has a relationship with TDS, that where an infrastructure debt fund has issued certain bonds which are zero coupon bonds, they would also be considered as zero coupon bonds for the purposes of section 2 subsection 48 of the Income Tax Act, and therefore would be separately liable to TDS. When we deal with TDS, we will discuss about these. Then we move to exemptions and charitable trust. You may appreciate one important thing is that I have tried to take up the presentation in the manner in which it is appearing in the finance bill. There could be several provisions which may not be very important or relevant for our discussion. So I will have the permission from the organizer to skip those things. Howsoever, if anyone wants to refer to those provisions, I have dutifully placed them in my presentation at appropriate places, and you may please go through each of them. The first major exemption is in relation to the leave travel concession. Ordinarily, all of us are aware that when a person is in receipt of leave travel concession, Section 10, subsection 5 provides for exemption subject to certain conditions, and the calculation of the concession for exemption is provided in Section 10(5) itself. This is a different provision which now provides that for the purpose of AY 21-22, for the purposes of AY 21-22, if a person instead of traveling on a leave and receiving concession or allowance for such a travel, if he receives anything in lieu of such a travel concession in cash, what he receives anything in lieu of concession in cash, then this is the provision which will apply for exempting. The logic or the rationale behind this provision is that due to COVID-19, the employee and his family may not be able to travel because of the travel restrictions which were all around. Then in that such a case, if he is receiving a cash concession, if he is receiving a cash allowance, which is in lieu of the concession which he would have otherwise received, and if it is received subject to certain conditions, then in such case, the amount which is receiving, he has received or would be receiving up to 31st March 2021 would not be liable to tax. And what are the conditions? That it should be like in the block period, it should be within the block period of 18 to 21. Second is the money which is received in cash. This is a strange requirement, but the money which is received in cash, the person is required to spend the money on purchase of certain specified goods, and those specified goods should be liable to GST at a rate which is 12% or more, at a rate which is 12%. So you are actually required to spend this money, once you receive the concession or allowance from the employer. And this amount should be received during a period 12/10/2020 and 31/3/2021, and significantly it is also required to be spent during that period, and the payment is to be made as per rule 6 BBA, which on being prescribed, you may please look into it. And tax invoice is mandatory. If you satisfy all these conditions, then in that case you would be entitled to claim a deduction or an exemption of an amount of rupees 36,000, or one third of the expenditure actually incurred, whichever is lower. This is the amount which will be eligible for exemption and would be per person, per family member. The next is in relation to ULIP. This is a little different amendment, so please pay attention to that. What has been thought was that when an exemption is being provided in respect of the amount received on maturity of a life insurance policy, that amount subject to conditions was not taxable, was exempt under the provisions of section 1010D. However, the persons who had been taking unit linked insurance policy, in such cases, section 1010D was not applicable. And therefore, in such cases, whatever was received on maturity was not liable to tax, was not liable to tax. In order to do away with such an anomaly, it has now been provided that if any person who has been paying premium under ULIP of an amount exceeding rupees 2,50,000, or where there are multiple policies, if the aggregate of payment does not exceeds 2,50,000, then in that case, the person on receipt of a maturity would not be eligible to claim exemption in respect of the receipts on maturity. With this, those people who used to contribute high premium for ULIP would now not be benefited on account of this particular ULIP contribution. ULIP now would be considered as a capital asset within the meaning of section 2 subsection 14, and on redemption of unit, whatever capital gain would arise subject to the provisions of section 48 and 49 would be subjected to capital gains. This is the sum and substance of the amendment which is made in respect of ULIP. The next is once again an important amendment, that whenever a person used to receive interest, that interest was in that interest, whenever a person used to receive interest on his country, on his balance in the provident fund account, whether the registered provident fund account or the employees provident fund account, in both such cases, the interest was not liable to tax. It was fully exempt. It was seen by the government of India that this exemption was being abused in some cases, whereby the employees used to contribute huge amounts, and the interest which was being received, which was at times 8% on the contribution, was not being taxed and was being exempt. In order to do away with this, it is now provided that when the annual contribution to any of such account by an employee exceeded 2,50,000 rupees, then in such case the interest attributable to the excess over 2,50,000 would not be liable to be would not be eligible for exemption. The next is in respect of the educational institutions and hospitals. When a person used to claim exemption under 1023C in respect of the income of the hospitals and educational institutions, it was dispensed with, exempted from certain compliances in case where the total receipts of these institutions and hospitals did not exceed 1 crore of rupees. Up to rupees 1 crore, compliance was, something which was not required to be followed by these institutions. Now this limit has been raised to 5 crores. The sum and substance of it is that instead of 1 crore, now up to 5 crores, these hospitals or institutions will enjoy the exemptions even where they are not burdened with some of the compliance conditions which continue to be same. Then there are some important amendments which have been made, in respect of the institutions which are covered by 1023C, and the charitable trust or charitable institutions which are covered by section 11 of the Income Tax Act. Three important amendments have been made. The first one is, it is clarifying that a corporate donation, which has always been the law, would not be treated as an income for the purposes of section 11. It would be where in cases where the donation has been received voluntary with a specific direction, that it should be the donation should be spent for a a specific purpose. So this would be known as a corpus donation, which would not be treated as a part of the receipts which is otherwise governed by the regiment of section 11. The second important thing which is saying is that when you spend this money, when you spend any money out of corpus donation, it would not be treated as an application for the purposes of determining whether 85% of the annual contribution received has been spent or not. So therefore, now it would be very essential to establish that 85% of the donation other than corpus donation are actually spent during the year for the purposes of the objects of the trust. If you have not so spent, then in the alternative, you are required to make an application for accumulation of such donation, and for a period of 5 years you can accumulate it, and thereafter you should have utilized the money which has been accumulated on the objects of the trust. So this is the first major amendment which has happened in relation to section 11 as also section 1023C. The second major amendment which is sought to be made out, that till date, if you had borrowed money, if the trust or the institution had borrowed money and which was utilized on, which was applied on expenditure or the objects of the trust, it was considered to be an application. It was considered to be an application for the purposes of computing the limit of 85%. Now it has been so provided that when you have applied money out of the loans, out of the loan received or the funds borrowed, and if you have made expenditure out of that, that would in the year of taking loan would not be considered as an application and would not be counted for the purposes of 85% application. Having said that, it has also now been provided that in the year when the loan has been repaid, in the year when the loan has been repaid by the trust or the institution, the amount of repayment would be considered as an amount which is applied on the objects of the trust, and in that year it will fall in the calculation of 85%. This is the second major amendment which has been provided for. The third amendment which has been, I'm sorry, the third amendment which is provided is in relation where there is a double deduction which is sought to be claimed. Such double deduction now would not be anymore permitted, and the amount of corpus donation would be required to be invested as per the regiment of section 11(5). Sovereign wealth funds is one which is applicable to just one fund overseas, and we will skip that. Then we come to profits and gains of business and profession. The important amendment which has been made here is in multiple sections. The first amendment is made in section 211. The second is made in section 32. The third is made in section 50. The sum and substance, the collective substance of this amendment is that the Supreme Court in one of the cases, that is Smith Securities cases, settled a proposition that an assessee who has a goodwill in his books of account, then that goodwill would be considered as an intangible asset. That intangible asset in the form of goodwill will enter into the block of asset. That is where section 2 subsection 11 comes. It will enter into block of assets, and therefore because it has entered into block of asset, it will be eligible to depreciation as available to an intangible asset at the rate of 25% of the cost of actual cost, and thereafter on the WDV. And in the event if the goodwill is transferred, it will be once again provisions of section 50 would apply, and the sale consideration minus the WDV would be considered as a short-term capital gain in the year of transfer of goodwill. This is what was the provision as was explained by the Supreme Court. In short, the important thing was that whenever there was a goodwill, it was eligible for depreciation. The Supreme Court had went a step further to say that if a goodwill arose in the course of reorganization like an amalgamation, then in such case, such a goodwill would be considered to be a goodwill which was acquired for the purposes of cost of acquisition, which was acquired for a cost, and therefore it was that cost of acquisition which was eligible for the depreciation. For some reason, the government was never happy with the Supreme Court decision and the earlier decisions. And therefore, now an amendment is sought to be introduced with the current year and would apply to AY 21-22 to provide that goodwill not enter into a block of asset. A goodwill for the purposes of section 32 would also not be considered as an intangible asset, and the collective meaning of this outcome of this would be that a goodwill henceforth would not be eligible for a depreciation. It has also been now provided by amending section 50 that whatever depreciation which has been allowed on goodwill till assessment year 2021 would be considered as the depreciation allowed, and in the event of transfer of goodwill, in such case, the depreciation so far allowed up to AY 2021 would go to reduce the cost of acquisition of goodwill, and it is this cost of acquisition which for the purposes of section 48 would be reduced from the full value of consideration. This is once again a major amendment which will impact several restructuring entities, and also the cases wherein the assessee has acquired goodwill and paid for it. Now this is important. Even when you have acquired goodwill and have paid for this, you will not be entitled to depreciation on it. Of course, that cost of acquisition would be allowed as a deduction in the event that goodwill has been transferred for a valuable consideration. This is what we discussed just now. The next is again an important amendment which is made in the context of 36(1)(5)(a). All friends, see as practitioners of taxation, a regular original site taxation, are aware that whenever an employee's contribution which has been deposited by the employer late outside the grace period which is provided in the Employees Provident Fund Act or Employers Provident Fund Act, then in such case, if even if the contribution was deposited late, if such amount was deposited within the grace period or before the year end or before the due date of filing the return of income, by virtue of several decisions, especially Bombay High Court in Gadke Patil's case and Uttarakhand decision in Kicha Sugar's case, that such a contribution was not denied the deduction, denied the deduction. The logic behind that was supplied by stating that such a contribution, when it was employer's contribution, it was eligible for deduction under section 43B. It was eligible for deduction, and 43B facilitated such a deduction. To do away with such a license or a permission, now a specific amendment has been provided in 36(1)(5)(a) and 43B, which now collectively provides that any such deposit of employees' contribution late beyond the grace period provided under Employees Contribution Act would not be eligible. The deduction would be lost forever. Even if you pay it outside grace period before the year end, even if you pay it by the due date of income, you produce the receipts of such payments, you would not be denied, you would not be eligible for deduction. Even if you pay it outside the due date, then in the year in which you have paid, you will not be entitled to deduction. The sum and substance of it is that this deduction would not be allowed. You need to ensure that this contribution is paid in time. As far as employer's contribution is concerned, the law remains unchanged. The law remains unchanged, and you will continue to get deduction for the same as long as you pay either within grace period or by the year end or by the due date of filing return. And when you fail to do so any of within the time limits of any of these three provisions, if you still make the payment in the year in which you make the payment, you will continue to get the deduction subject to the limits of section 43b. The next is safe harbor limit. There are two provisions, section 43CA and 56(2)(10), which when applied to a case of a sale of a residential unit by a builder developer and purchase of such a residential unit by a purchaser, then the provisions of 43CA applied in cases where the agreement value was shorter than the stamp duty value of these premises. 43CA provided that in the case of a builder developer, the stamp duty value would be considered as a consideration for the purposes of computing the profits and gains of business in the hands of a builder developer. Simultaneously, it also provided in 56(2)(10) that the difference between the agreement value and the stamp duty value would be considered as income from other sources in the hands of the purchaser. So this was a case of a double jeopardy, and in such cases, two persons had to pay tax on the same quantum of income. These provisions continue. These provisions continue, friends. There is no change. So therefore, what I am discussing is something different. The law at the same time provides in 43CA as also in 56(2)(10) that if the difference is up to 10%, then in that case, no addition would be made under 43CA nor under 56(2)(10). This license of 10% is known as safe harbor limit for the assessees. Realizing that that there has been a substantial fall in the value of the premises which are being sold by the builder, and there is not necessarily a simultaneous adjustment or pull down of the values in the ready reckoner or the circle rates. To do away with such an anomaly, the central government has come forward to provide that this limit of 10% is now raised to 20%. Limit of 10% is now raised to 20%. But this concession comes with certain conditions. And what are those conditions? Let us see these. The first is that the transfer should take place between 12th November and 30th June 2021. So therefore, this relaxation applies for two assessment years, 2021, 21-22 and 22-23, subject to the transfer taking place during this specified period. The second condition is that it should be a first time allotment by the builder developer to the purchaser. It should not be a case of a resale by the builder developer purchaser. It should be a case wherein the builder developer is allotting these premises for the first time to a buyer who is a first time buyer. The third condition is that the consideration, and here it is the agreement value, does not exceed 2 crores of rupees. If it exceeds 2 crores of rupees, I am afraid this concession is not for you. And the fourth and the last concession is that this concession is eligible only in respect of transfer of residential units. Only in respect of transfer of residential units and not otherwise. So what we have understood is there are four conditions which are to be satisfied, and once they are satisfied, if your agreement value is less by 20% of the stamp duty value, you do not need to fear as a builder, not as a purchaser also. Importantly, residential unit is defined to be an independent housing unit, which is so defined under Section 80 IBA for the purposes of deduction for housing projects. What is significant here is that the unit should be independent and it should have access, a common access, one access. It should have a kitchen. It should have it should have a residential unit, and it should also have a washroom and toilet and such other things. The only doubt which arises here is that would this benefit be available in case of joint purchasers? The reason the doubt arises in if due to reason that the condition, one of the conditions for this license is that it should be an independent residential unit. So would it therefore be possible for the concession in case where more than one persons purchase this unit? This issue used to arise regularly in the interpretation of section 54 and 54F, wherein the courts have been consistently holding that even a joint owner is eligible for concession. Whether this analogy can be drawn further and imported in the understanding of 43CA or 5610 to 10, the time would decide. However, I would believe that it was possible to hold that the concession under 43CA would not be denied even in case of joint purchasers, and the joint purchasers, both of them, would be eligible for the benefit of the difference of safe harbor limits for 56 to 10. The next is tax audit. A year back, there had been a relaxation from compliance of tax audit in cases of person who did not receive the sale consideration of the goods sold by him for more than 5% in cash, who did not receive cash exceeding rupees 5% in respect of his receipts. Simultaneously, it is also provided that his expenditure, his payments including expenditure in cash did not exceed 5%. In such cases, you were not required to get your accounts audited up to a limit of 5 crores of rupees. Up to a limit of 5 crores of rupees. So if your turnover did not exceed 5 crores of rupees, your gross receipts did not exceed 5%, 5 crores of rupees, you were dispensed with the obligation to get your accounts audited. I don't consider it to be a very major concession, but be they it may be, it was considered to be a concession and it is there. This would continue to be there on the text with a major difference that now if you satisfy the conditions of 5%, less than 5%, cash receipts and cash payments, then in such case, you would be not liable to tax audit up to an amount of 10 crores of rupees. So there is a 100% jump from compliance for a turnover or gross receipt of rupees from 5 crores to 10 crores of rupees. The next is about the presumptive taxation, which is a clarification. In case of a professional who is engaged in some of the specified profession, in his case, the limit of presumptive taxation applied up to a specified turnover. And in such case of limit up to 50 specified turnover, his income is presumed to be 50% of the total turnover or the gross receipts. there has been a doubt that these provisions were made applicable right from inception in respect of an individual or an HUF or a partnership firm. A doubt was about whether an LLP who wishes to take the benefit of Section 44 ADA would be entitled to do so or not. And now it has been provided, the doubt has been clarified with effect from AY 21-22 to now provide that the benefit of presumptive taxation under 44 ADA would not be provided, would not be conferred on an LLP which otherwise is required to get its account audited. This is something you may allow me to skip because this is applicable to a primary cooperative bank which has been converted during the year into a banking company. And in such case, the banking company will continue to get unabsorbed deductions and allowances. So permit me to skip this. It's applicable to very limited assets. Then we come to capital gains. There are some major amendments. These we need to consider here. The first major amendment is in respect of 45(4). I request Diresh Bhai, and other organizers to let me know at least 15 minutes in advance, when I am about to close. So accordingly, I'll speed up my presentation.
Okay, no problem, sir.
Right. Thank you so much. Yes. Because at times, when you speak, no, you lose the track of time. So therefore, I'll be very happy if any one of you would remind me at least 15 minutes in advance. So the first amendment which we are seeing is in 45(4). There is a complete overhauling of section 45(4). The present 45(4) is substituted with a new 45(4). In order to understand the new provision, permit me to share what has been the provision of present 45(4). The amendment is made effective from current year, AY 21-22, and those who had done certain reorganization by understanding 45(4) as it presently prevailing, they will have to apply their mind once again to the entire restructuring. The present 45(4) in nutshell provides that when a distribution of a capital asset took place on dissolution or otherwise, that is retirement and withdrawals and such other things. When a distribution of capital asset took place on dissolution or otherwise, then in such case, in the year of distribution, the difference between the fair market value of the asset, that capital asset that has been distributed, and the cost of acquisition of that asset would be brought to tax in the hands of the partnership firm. This is the sum and substance of it. And it is this provision which has been the subject matter of aggressive planning and fierce tax litigation. The government was never happy with that, and so the assessees also were never happy. In order to do away with this, a new provision is introduced, which is to an extent on the lines of the old provision, but significant changes have been made, which we will notice. The first is 45(1) would override 45(1), and therefore 45(1) for the purposes of our discussion, for the purposes of taxation, subject to section 48 would be a code by itself. That's one understanding we would derive. Second is it is applicable for AY 21-22 and would apply therefore to the current year and the assessment years onwards. What it provides is any profits or gains on receipt of a capital asset. This is the first major change. So far it had been provided that any profits or gains on distribution of a capital asset. Now distribution is not required. What is required is a receipt. What is required is a receipt by a specified person who is defined to be a partner, who is defined to be a partner or a member from a specific entity, specified entity, which is defined to be a partnership firm or an AOP or a body of individuals and such other loose associations. In all such cases now, if a person who is a partner or a member, if he receives a capital asset during the previous year from a partnership firm or such AOP, then and such receipt is associated to a dissolution or reconstitution of specific entity. The change here once again is that earlier provision provided that on dissolution or otherwise. So there was, see, a suspense over the meaning of otherwise. And the courts have been holding the term otherwise to mean retirement, and perhaps it would also be any distribution during the course of operation of the business of partnership firm by any of the partner, as long as it was treated as a distribution of a capital asset. Now, the term or otherwise has been replaced with the term reconstitution. Now, reconstitution of a partnership firm, if if it results into handing over or receipt of a capital asset by one of the partners, then in such case the provision would be attracted. Reconstitution is once again not defined, and it is left to anybody's guess. Your guess would be as good as my guess, and therefore, what would be reconstitution is something one will have to gather from the meaning of the term gathered in the ordinary parlance. Now, I would agree that that yes, that if any retirement happens, if any admission happens, it is possible that this would be considered to be cases of reconstitution for the purposes of new subsection 45(4). However, a withdrawal of an asset should surely not be considered as a reconstitution. And if I am right in my view, then to that extent, there should not apply the provisions of section 45(4), even if a partner has withdrawn a capital asset, as long as there is no dissolution or reconstitution of the specific entity. Then further, it has been so provided that in the year of receipt, there will be a taxation. In the year of receipt, there will be a taxation. And the taxation would be in the hands of the partnership firm, that is specified entity. In the past, in the operation of section 45(4), there had been some debate, delivered on account of certain Pune tribunal conflicting decisions, wherein one held that it should be taxed in the hands of the partnership firm on dissolution. The issue arose that when the firm itself is not in existence, then in that case, how would it be taxed? And then the Pune tribunal held that in such cases, it will be taxed in the hands of an AOP. The erstwhile partners would be considered to have constituted an AOP for a limited purpose of taxation, and then it would be so applicable. That was the decision of Kothari Vora Associates. As against that, the same Pune tribunal back to back held in case of PN Devgirikar that it would be the 45 crore provided for a fiction, and that deeming fiction should be carried to its logical conclusion, and therefore the gain, if made, would be taxed in the hands of the specified entity, that is the firm, it would be so. To do away with this controversy, now it has been specifically provided that the capital gains, if any, would be taxed in the hands of the partnership firm and not in the hands of the partners. There is one peculiar thing which has happened in the new 45.4, whereunder it is saying that where a person receives a capital asset, where a person that is a partner receives a capital asset from the firm, and that capital asset is representing a balance in his capital account. A capital asset representing the balance in his capital account, then in such case, the the capital account which is standing in the books of account of the partnership at the time of dissolution will have some role to play, for the purposes of section 48. Now what role it would play is not defined, is not clarified. And what is then provided by way of a proviso, that by not only proviso but by way of a computation provision, that it is providing that for the purposes of section 48, capital gains will be computed as per the provisions of the chapter 4D, which deals with capital gains. Now this leaves multiple doubts in the minds of a common reader, like me, that how would I compute the capital gains on account of receipt of a capital asset? As I had always understood, under the old regiment, I was required to deduct the cost of acquisition. If it was depreciated, the WDV thereof. If it was not depreciated, then I was to index the cost of acquisition and deduct it from the fair market value of the asset. It was a simple provision, and it had nothing to do with the balance of a partner of who was recipient in the books of account, in his capital account. So what is the significance of this particular balance in the capital account is on a first blush is not understood. What is further provided in the proviso is, it's not that that one could ascribe this to some kind of a printing error. There is a full length proviso which is inserted in 45.4 to provide that the balance in the capital account is to be reduced by the amount which is credited on account of revaluation, or the amount which is credited on account of the self-generating goodwill or self-generating asset. Meaning thereby that if your capital balance is fluffed, is inflated on account of this revaluation or the credit on account of self-generating asset, it has to be brought down. But after bringing it down, what do I have to do with such balance is not explained. So permit me to make a wild guess. What I would believe therefore is that for the purposes of 45.4, I would be allowed two deductions. One is that I will reduce my fair market value by the cost of acquisition of the asset. In addition, I should be allowed, because there is a specific provision which though does not provide for deduction, but which says in capital gains will be computed as per the provisions of chapter. So in such cases, now one would believe that the capital balance which I am holding in with the firm, as reduced by the revaluation benefits, would be the one which would be further deducted from the capital gain. So the formula will run like full value of consideration, which will be the fair market value, minus the cost of acquisition, indexed or otherwise. If it is WDV, then WDV. and minus a further deduction for the capital balance which is appearing in the books of account of the partner. If you like this, you know that in that case, this is the way there will be a possibility of reconciling. But when I try to reconcile, I also have a difficulty on section 2, subsection 42A, which defines the period of holding, which defines whether an asset is a short-term capital asset or a long-term capital asset. Now, in this case, based my period of holding would be considered for the capital balance qua the time when I became the partner, which need not necessarily be the same as the time when the firm acquired the capital asset. That asset once again could be further creating complication when it is a depreciable asset. So these three confusions, I leave it to you all participants for application of your mind. Presently, my mind tells me that there is a possibility of getting a deduction on account of the capital balance which is appearing in the books of account of a particular partner. With that, I permit me to move to the next provision. This is something I have already discussed. Next provision, which is a new provision in the form of 45(4)(a). In the form of 45(4)(a). This provision is a new provision which has been introduced with effect from once again AY 21-22, and therefore this also would apply to this. Materially, the provision is to an extent same as that of section 45(4)(a). But the significant difference is that while 45(4)(a) applies to the case of a receipt of a capital asset, this applies to a case of a receipt of money and other asset. I would therefore believe that when cash or any such amount is paid, when any money is paid to a partner on account of dissolution or reconstitution by the partnership firm, these provisions should be activated. This provision will also be activated when such a person receives anything in the form of an other asset. Other asset is not defined, but I would take a clue from 45(4). Because 45(4) deals with other asset, I would believe for 45(4) deals with capital asset, I would take a view that other asset would mean anything other than the capital asset. Any receipt which is in the form of any asset which is not money, then in that case 45(4)(a) would apply. On a first blush, I think that it can apply to for stock in trade also, but there could be doubts about it. It would be safer for me to therefore say that other assets would include all assets other than capital assets. So 45(4)(a) would apply in case where a partner receives any sum of money or other assets, then in such a case, now the capital gain is required to be computed. Now here it is wonderful. When you receive money, one would believe that the computation of capital gain would be the amount of money which is received by the person less the amount standing to the credit of the capital account of that particular person. So if a person has received 1.50 crores from the partnership firm and the capital account which is standing in his books is 1 crore of rupees, that 1 crore will be further reduced by any credits to his account on account of goodwill, say 10 lakhs of rupees. On account of revaluation, say 15 lakhs of rupees. This 25 lakhs will be reduced from 1 crore, and this 75 lakhs rupees, which is the resulting money, would be reduced from 1.50 crore, which the partner has received, giving a net capital gain of 75 lakhs rupees. That would be taxed in his hands. That would be taxed in hands. A capital account cannot be indexed, and I would therefore believe that it will not be indexed. The period of holding would be determined from the day when the person became a partner. So as far as this part is concerned, when a person receives money, this is clear. What is very important here is that it is reversing host of decisions. There is a substantially developed case law on account of receipt of such money. A good part of cases, including Supreme Court, have held that this amount would not be taxed in the hands of the partnership firm. And there had also been a clarity that the firm cannot be taxed in respect of such payments in cash because 45(4) did not apply to, to such cases in the hands of the firm. There had been some tribunal decisions of a recent origin of Mumbai and Bangalore, which had said that such receipts could be taxed in the hands of the partner. But these decisions, these tribunals, these benches were in minorities. There were High Court cases and there was a Supreme Court cases which said that these amounts are not taxable. Now this 45(4)(a) does away with this settled position in law. And therefore, with effect from AY 2021-22, any receipt of money by a partner would be liable to be taxed. And the important change is that it would be taxed in the hands of the partnership firm. It would be taxed in the hands of the partnership firm. Whether it would be taxed as long term or a short term is once again a challenge. Whether benefit would be allowed of a long, indexation or not is again a challenge. Howsoever, rationally we have understood that income, if at all, would be computed by deducting the capital balance from the amount paid and would be taxed in the hands of the partnership firm. Now, when it comes to distribution, when it comes to receipt of other asset, the difficulty that would arise here is that Section 48 has been amended for the purposes of Section 4A, subsection 4A, not for subsection 4. It provides that for the purposes of Section 4A, when a person is in receipt of a capital asset on dissolution or reconstitution, then in that case, the fair market value less the amount standing in the books of account in the name of the partner's account would be allowed to be deducted. There is no mention whatsoever that deduction would be given as per the chapter. There is no mention also that cost of acquisition of the other asset, whether depreciated or otherwise, whether indexed or otherwise, would be allowed as a deduction. So there is a great confusion and anomaly. The further confusion is that 45(4)(a), as I noted, is applicable for other assets and not capital asset. But when you come to section 48, it talks about 45(4)(a), but it once again talks of a capital asset, which once again is an anomaly. Let's not make a mountain out of this small mistake. Maybe as the time would pass, at the time of enactment of the budget, what would be provided would be that in the event where 4A is applicable and where other asset has been received by a partner, then in such a case, what would be allowed as a deduction would be the amount standing to the credit of the partner. There is a great deal of confusion in 45(4) and 45(4)(a). So therefore, please read it with a pinch of salt. Why I am discussing it in detail is it is already applicable. Some people might have already paid huge amounts, on the assumption that it is not taxable. Everything will have to be reviewed, and even when I'm willing to pay tax, unfortunately the computation mechanism is not helping me to compute. It's not telling me what is deductible in precise terms. So therefore please apply your mind before you further proceed to this. This was about 45.4 and 45.4a. Then about the persons who have transferred residential premises in order to fund the startups, which have been constituted by these persons. Then in such case, if there was a transfer of residential premises and which was reinvested in the shares of startup, then in that case up to 31/3/2020, exemption under 54 GB was allowed. One more year has been extended. Now, if you do so up to 31st March 2021, you would be eligible for the benefit of exemption from capital gain. This is limited to those who are in the business of startups and who have sold the residential premises in order to fund the capital of the startups. Then we come to losses. I don't think much would turn in respect of this is again amalgamation of public sector companies. Now we are running short of time, so allow me to skip. Then admissible deduction. The first is in relation to there is a deduction of up to rupees 1,50,000 in respect of a loan taken for residential property which satisfies some conditions, which is part of affordable housing project and such other things. Then the buyer of a house used to get deduction of 1,50,000 up to 31st March 2021. That's the provision which has been right now there in the textbook. It has now been provided that this benefit would be extended up to interest which is paid up to 31st March 2022. That is provided you have purchased the house property up to 31st March 2022. Same is the case, in relation to startups that, where startups which have commenced its business up to 1/4/2021, they were entitled to deduction. Now, if you have commenced the business of startup up to 1/4/2022, you would continue to get the benefit. Similarly, an extension of 1 year is provided for the scheme of affordable housing projects. Of course, housing projects and not necessarily affordable housing projects. As long as the housing projects satisfied the conditions of 80 IBA, then there is an extension of 1 more year for putting up or satisfying the conditions of housing project. Minimum alternative tax is in respect of foreign company. It's applicable to limited companies, so therefore I would skip this. Then important amendments have been made. Almost many things have been overhauled in respect of procedures of returns, in respect of issue of notices, in respect of assessment, in respect of special assessment of such cases, and also for the reopening and reassessments. While it may not be humanly possible for me to take you to each of the amendments made in respect of this, but trust me that I'll be able to share with you the broad provisions, and the minor aspects of it are all been listed in the PowerPoint. The first important amendment is that a spouse of a partner of a firm whose accounts are required to be audited, and if where the spouses are governed by section 5A of Portuguese Civil Code, then in such case, even in the case of a spouse, the time for filing return of income is extended to 31st October, or when 31st October is extended to 15th of February, then it will be so. So this has applicable applications to limited cases. This has application to limited cases. My mind was wondering, when income of a spouse was to be clubbed in the hands of the another spouse, and in whose case the time limit was 31st October on account of tax audit, would it not be so that in such cases also, where accounts of the spouse whose income is clubbed are audited, then in that case, the person who pays tax, his time also should be extended. A minor thing of not significant concern, but because now such benefits are being conferred, there is a thought which is shared with you. Then, when a partner of a firm is required to furnish a transfer pricing audit report, then in that case, the due date would be extended also for the partner. So this is something which should have been there since so many years, but it is now being introduced with effect from AY 21-22. Then two significant amendments of the day-to-day practice have been introduced. That is, presently section 139(4) provides for filing of belated return, and 139(5) provides for filing of a revised return of income in respect of all assessees. These returns are to be filed as the law stands today up to AY 2021 by the end of the assessment year for which the return is to be filed. So when we are filing returns for, say, example 2021, AY 2021, what would be the last date for filing return of income? Belated return would be 31st March 2021. That is the end of the assessment year. So is the time for filing a revised return of income. Now it has been provided for reasons which are recorded in the memorandum explaining the provisions of the finance bill, that these returns, both the returns, belated and the revised returns, are to be filed by 31st December 2021. Are to be filed by 31st December 2021. One would believe the time itself, when the time itself has been extended for filing the original return, then in that case, up to that time, one would be permitted to file the belated return or the revised return. Sensible thing would be that the government should extend the date while passing the bill for belated return the and the revised return by retaining the old dates and make these applicable from the next year. So this is as far as 139(4) and 5 are concerned. Then this was about return of income. Then the next is to this is that issue of notice under section 142(1). Now the prescribed IT authorities besides AO is permitted to issue notice under section 142(1). Today, such a notice can be issued only by AO. Now, in such case, when you have faceless assessment provisions, in such case, the government is envisaging that a notice may be issued by some authority which may not be necessarily an assessing officer. He could be an important authority. He could be an inspector also. As long as such a notice is issued even by a principal chief commissioner of Income Tax Act, as long as he is an IT authority, provisions of section 142(1) would be said to have been complied. The next,
15 minutes.
sorry,
15
15. Okay, so we will rush through it. Maybe instead of 15 minutes, I may take little more.
No problem, no problem. Take
But
your own time.
yeah, As long as you all feel that I am making some value addition to your time, permit me to share this, but I'll try to finish it as early as possible.
No problem, sir.
Yeah,
Take your own time.
right. Yeah, the mistake honestly is not on my part for the reason that huge number of amendments, there are 79 amendments which have been introduced. So therefore it's taking little time, and some of them are, cunning amendments. So therefore I need to explain to you in little detail.
No
Now,
problem.
now it has been provided that while issuing 143(1)(a) intimation, the CPCAO is authorized to make adjustment based on the remarks of the tax auditor in the tax audit report. So this will also be applicable to AY 21-22. Then it has been provided that when an allowance or deduction is given on account of section 10AA or chapter 6A, then only when return of income has been filed by due date under section 139(1). If you have failed to file, then 143(1)(a) adjustment would be permissible. To an extent, all these, both the provisions were there, in the existing 143(1)(a). However, now it has been made abundantly clear with effect from 21-22. Similarly, a 143(1) intimation could be sent today by 1 year from the end of the year, 1 year from the end of the year in which the return of income was filed. So for AY 2021, when you file the return of income in financial year 2021, intimation could be issued up to 31st March 2022. 31st March 2022. Now the amendment provides that the intimation will have to be issued by 31st December 2021 instead of 31st March 2022. This is the amendment for intimation. Then a major amendment is made in respect of scheme of assessments, scheme of reassessments, and scheme of special assessments. Considering the time available, permit me to briefly share the overall things instead of referring to the PowerPoint. The first is in respect of 143(2), the time for issue of notice, which hitherto was 6 months from the end of the year in which the return was filed, is now reduced to 3 months. So therefore, now a notice will have to be necessarily issued by 30th of June instead of 30th of September. This is assuming that the returns are filed within at least the financial following the year financial year. So if the returns are filed in assessment year, the time for issue of notice of under section 143(2) is reduced by 3 months to now 3 months alone. So this is as far as the notice under 143(2) is concerned. As far as the reassessment reopening is concerned, the major amendment which is sought is that presently reassessment could be made by issue of a notice under section 140 when the person who is issuing the notice has a reason to believe that income has escaped assessment. Then in such case where the assessment is not completed under 143(3) by appreciation of material facts, then in such the assessment could be reopened within a period of 4 years from the end of assessment years. And where the assessment is passed under 143(3), then it could be reopened within a period of 6 years. That's as far as reopening is concerned. Further to that is when a notice is issued under 140 on account of the Black Money Act on account of your foreign money transactions, the reassessment could take place up to 10 assessment years. Up to 10 assessment years. And lastly, for the purposes where a search has taken place under section 132 or a requisition has been issued under section 132A, then in such case, the person was AO was allowed to issue notices for 6 preceding previous years plus plus the year in which the search or requisition took place. This is the sum and substance of the present law. This capsule is now sought to be totally overhauled. So the first amendment which is being made is that a reopening where 143.3 order or 143.1 intimation is passed, in all such cases, the notice for reopening can be issued only within a period of 3 years from the end of the assessment years. So, in one shot, the government has reduced the maximum time period of 6 years to 3 years. The provisions of BMA would continue to apply. Secondly, the government in the one shot has done away with the provisions of section 153A and 153C. I would believe that the entire chapter done away with this. So whenever a search would take place, no notices would be issued for a block period of 6 years plus 1 year of the year in which search or requisition took place. No notices under 153A would be issued. Instead, a notice will be issued under section 148, read with 148A, which is a new prescription. A notice will be issued for under 148 in such cases within a period of 6 years from the end of the assessment year. But the major difference is that it is not necessary that AO would be entitled to issue notice for all 6 years. He will have to be selective and he will have to establish that income has escaped assessment for all 6 years. Failing which, in such case, he would be issuing notices only for years for which there is an understanding that income has escaped assessment. Very major change. In short, what is happening is after a journey of about 25 years, we are going back to the original scheme of assessment, which always provided that you can assess an income for the specified period. You can reopen an assessment for an year for which you have a reason to believe that income has escaped assessment, and such was within the prescribed period. This is what it was. This good law was overtaken by a scheme which came from for a period 96 to 2003 in the form of block assessment, which was substituted by special assessment, which operated for another period of 2003 to 2021. And now we are revisiting the original scheme, which perhaps is the best scheme which was prevailing. So here is a case wherein AO would be entitled to issue notice for the current year of search, B, where notice is for which the time has not expired for issue of 143.2, he would be entitled to issue a 148 notice for the years in which there is an escapement of income. There is an escapement of income. So what has happened is that the entire scheme has been overhauled. And with that, the scope, with that, the period of reassessment also is reduced by 3 months. The time limit for passing an order of reassessment is also by 3 months, reduced by 3 months. Two very significant amendments has happened in overhauling. And what are they? The first is that in order for issue of a notice under section 148, today an assessing officer has to believe, has to have a reason to believe that income has escaped assessment. And thereafter he has to record such reasons. Two very important safeguards which have pleased the Supreme Court to uphold the provisions of reopening time and again. Now it has been provided that if an income has escaped within the meaning of the income which has escaped assessment, then in that case it will not be necessary for AO to have a reason to believe. It will not be necessary for AO to record the reasons for reopening. But instead it has now been provided that the AO in most of the cases, other than the specified cases, will have to issue a notice which is a new prescription in the form of section 148A. In the form of 148A. And this notice is a prelude to notice under section 148. He will issue a notice, he will invite you to explain that why no reopening should be done. He will also issue this notice by obtaining the sanction of the higher authority. Thereafter, you will have a power to object to such notice. If the AO is satisfied that your objections are valid, no 148 notice will be issued. But if the AO is dissatisfied, then in that case, once again with the permission of the higher ups, he would be then issuing 148 notice for period of 3 years or period of 6 years. For period of 3 years or period of 6 years, which is the new prescription for the reopening, whether such cases or otherwise. But some of the cases are saved from operation of 148A. These are the search cases, survey cases, and such other cases, BMA cases, and such other cases which are prescribed cases. Then in such case, he will not have to issue 148 and he can straight away proceed with reopening of the case by issuing 148 notice. This, friends, has been sum and substance of the provisions up to all these 153A, 153B, 153C. Now, these are tables which are recording, which are saying what I have stated otherwise. Wherever tables were possible, I have tried to also give you tables, which will be more helpful. Now, with this, perhaps after taking this, before taking this, I may tell you something about that the important things. Settlement Commission has been Settlement Commission has been dispensed with, is dismantled yesterday. No new cases of settlement applications will be entertained by the settlement application. An interim board for settlement would be constituted in different places, which will deal with all pending applications, which will be transferred to different interim boards, different benches. And it is these boards which will deal with settlement. And it will have all the powers under Chapter 19A for deciding on the settlement petitions. But no new petitions now would be filed by any person. Second major overhauling is that you have authority for advance ruling. Authority for advance ruling, and its scope is presently for non-resident and resident, subject to certain specified conditions, in which case before filing a return of income, an assessee or before assessment, a person who is a non-resident or a resident in the specified cases could move the authority for advance ruling for the purposes of obtain an advance ruling, and which advance ruling is binding on the department and also on the assessee. Now this also is sought to be done away with. A new board of advance ruling BAR, instead of R, now it would be substituted by bar, but it would be substituted under a new scheme which will be announced by the central government up to 31st March 2023. Up to 21st March 2023, multiple boards will be constituted, and the constitution of the board will be totally different than the present constitution. Today, the chairman of the board is the Chief Justice of a High Court or the judge of a Supreme Court. Today, the vice chairman of the board are the judges of the High Court or the Supreme Court, and the members are otherwise from different places, like retired principal commissioner and such other things. Now it is so provided that the bar would be of two persons only, of two persons. One of them would be the law member and the other one would be the regular member, and both these members would be the persons who are retired chief commissioners. So therefore, this entire sanctity of the advance ruling would be subject to a stake, a serious stake, and therefore whether person would be any more referring to such things or not, I am not aware of. Let us see the schemes which would be announced. One more thing is that there is a dispute resolution committee which is sought to be introduced on the lines of DRP, which is presently dispute resolution panel. Now this dispute resolution panel committee benefit is available only to a person who is resident. Is available to a person who had filed a return of income of an income up to rupees 50 lakh of rupees, and in whose case there is a proposal to make addition of an amount not more than 10 lakhs of rupees. In such case, such a person, who could be any assessee, could approach a dispute resolution committee with a plea that in his case his application should be admitted, and the benefit which is otherwise available under chapter 9AA should be made available to him. And what is the benefit that would be made available to him is that he will be required to pay taxes, but by mercy of DRC, he would not be required to pay penalty, and also if no prosecution will be initiated, and if initiated would be dropped. This is the sum and substance of dispute resolution council, which will also be available for assessment year 21-22. It has a prospective application for assessments up to 2021. The benefit of DRC would not be available, but for AY 21-22 onwards, benefit of DRC would be available. The major difference between DRC and AR is that in case of like DRP, you would be entitled to file an appeal, but appeal here would be filed to the High Court. Appeal here would be filed to the High Court. Settlement Commission we have discussed, advance ruling we have discussed broadly. This is one important amendment which is made, is that on the lines of faceless assessments and the faceless appeals, a provision has been mooted even to make IT80 proceedings faceless. Now this is very fantastic to a person like me. But what it means is that, now there will be faceless hearings. Whether that would be hearing or not, the scheme would tell us whether there would be virtual hearing or not. that the scheme would tell us. But one thing which is sure is this: once there is a faceless hearing, faceless ITAT proceeding, faceless proceeding, then in that case, your power to opt for physical hearing, which presently available in COVID times, will not be available to you. That is one. Second is that the ITAT would be vested with a dynamic jurisdiction, meaning thereby that it could be any bench who would be hearing your case, and it could be any bench who would be passing the order in your case. With these, friends, permit me to rest. TDS and TDS are procedural provisions. There are substantial amendments. The only important amendment of significance is in cases where a person who has not been filing return of income for certain number of years, then in that case he will have to, while deducting the tax, the payer would be deducting tax at a higher rate of 5% or the specified rate, whichever is higher. Please look into these provisions. And whenever he is a person who also has not obtained PAN, then in that case, the provisions of 206AA would be mixed with 206AB and 20. These provisions are also made applicable to TCS. You advise your client to be careful about these provisions as they are made applicable to the current year as well. What is significant is that now if you do not file the return of income, then in such case, I am afraid that higher rate of tax would be deducted at source, higher rate of tax would be collected at source. With that, permit me to sit down. Thank you so much. Thank you for a patient hearing, and thank you for a nice opportunity to present my views. Thank you so much, Diresh Bhai and other organizers.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, it is indeed most informative, and we have been delighted to hear you, sir. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for all your guidance and all your time, valuable time you have given to us. Our each member has been benefited a lot, and we are very much sure that uh, we will also get the benefit of your hard work in the form of PowerPoint presentation, so that we can circulate. Thank you so much, sir, once again. And now I request President Emeritus of Income Tax Bar Association, Sri Dhiresh Bhai, to give his concluding remarks.
મિત્રો, આપણે બજેટ એનાલિસિસ સાંભળ્યું. હું 1965થી બજેટ એનાલિસિસ સાંભળતો આવ્યો છું. આ કદાચ મારા યાદશક્તિ પણ પહેલું એનાલિસિસ છે કે જેમાં બધા જ સેક્શનો કવર કર્યા. બાકી જનરલી સ્પીકર બીજી બધી વાતો કરે, પણ આ આપણે એટલે આપણે વાંચવાનો આપણે આખો ઇન્કમ ટેક્સ સુધારવાનો એટલું બધું જ્ઞાન આપણને આપી દીધું. કેટલા કલાકમાં? કાલે 1 વાગે બજેટ પૂરું થયું. આજે 1 વાગ્યાથી એમની 2 મિટિંગો હતી અને 5 વાગે જેવા મિટિંગમાંથી ફ્રી થયા આવ્યા. આજે ખૂબ રાતના ઉજાગરો કર્યો છે. થાક પણ એમના મોં ઉપર દેખાય છે. અને આપણે આ તકે એમનો જેટલો આભાર માનીએ એટલું ઓછું છે. અને એટલું બધું સરસ રીતે સમજાવ્યું છે કે હવે આપણે જો વાંચીશું તો આપણા મનમાં સીધું સિરા જેવું ઉતરી જશે. પહેલાં તો હવે 3 વાર અમુક સુધારા વાંચવો પડે. નોટ બી સ્ટેન્ડિંગ ડેટના અને પછી બીજું કંઈક ક્યાંય જોડ્યું હોય, ત્રીજું ક્યાંય જોડ્યું હોય. એટલે એ બધાની અંદર એમને જે આ રીતે પાવર પ્રેઝન્ટેશન તમે બજેટ સ્પીચ વાંચ્યું એ પણ પહેલી છે. જેટલું આટલું બધું જ એમને એક સેક્શન, એટલે આ બજેટની જે પાવર પ્રેઝન્ટેશન છે એસોસિએશન બધાને મોકલી આપે એવી વિનંતી કરું છું. અને પ્રદીપભાઈ, તમારો ખૂબ 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 આભાર માનું છું એસોસિએશનના બધા સભ્યો વતી, એસોસિએશન વતી. અને ફરી જ્યારે અમે કોઈ સબ્જેક્ટ પર બોલાવીએ ત્યારે જરૂરથી રૂબરૂ પગલાં કરશો એવી વિનંતી કરું છું. આપણે સૌ
દિનેશભાઈ, મારે તમને કાંઈ કહેવું છે.
સાહેબ,
હા, રાઈટ. ગઈકાલે જ્યારે આપણે વાત કરી ત્યારે આપે કીધેલું હતું કે બનશે તો ગુજરાતીમાં વાત કરજો કરીને. હાજી. અને આપણે એમ નક્કી કરેલું હતું કે જ્યાં જ્યાં બની શકશે તો ગુજરાતીમાં વાત કરશું. સમાવ છે ને સમય ઓછો હતો અને ગુજરાતીમાં થોડી આપણે વાતો ના કરી. એમાં એવું નથી કે મને ગુજરાતી ગમતું નથી. હા, મારું ભણતર ગુજરાતીમાં છે અને મારી મધર ટંગ પણ ગુજરાતી છે. પણ એક પ્રોબ્લેમ હંમેશા આવે છે જ્યારે ઇન્કમ ટેક્સ એક્ટને ગુજરાતીમાં સમજાવવાની કોશિશ કરું છું ને ત્યારે છે ને ઇન્કમ ટેક્સ એક્ટ અને મારી વાઈફ સાથેનો સંબંધ છે ને સરખો થઈ જાય છે. હું ઇન્કમ ટેક્સને બી બહુ પ્રેમ કરું છું અને મારી વાઈફને બી બહુ પ્રેમ કરું છું, પણ બંનેને ક્યારે સમજાવી નથી શક્યો કે હું તમને પ્રેમ કરું છું. So therefore, you may pardon my, presenting my views in English કરીને.
પણ
Thank
સાહેબ
you so much.
કહું
Yes.
ને કે
Yes.
તમે એટલું બધું સરળ ઇંગ્લિશમાં સમજાવ્યું છે,
હાજી હાજી.
કોઈને ગુજરાતીમાં નથી બોલ્યા એવું લાગતું જ નથી.
ચલો,
અને
thank
તમારી
you
જે
so much.
ફોટોજેનિક મેમરી, આઈ કેન સે યોર મેમરી ફોટોજેનિક મેમરી.
PowerPoint જો
આવું
Yes.
તમે આટલું બધું તૈયાર કરો અને આટલું રજૂઆત કરી શકો, એક પણ શ્વાસ લીધા વગર એમ કીધું તો ચાલે, અને આટલા થાક પછી એટલે મારી ભાઈ વી હેવ નો વર્ડ્સ ટુ એક્સપ્રેસ અવર ગ્રેટિટ્યુડ એન્ડ થેન્ક્સ સર.
Thank you so
એટલે
much.
ગુજરાતીમાં તમે બોલ્યા છો એવું જ માનજો, કારણ કે બહુ
ચલો,
સિમ્પલ
સરસ.
હતું સાહેબ, બહુ સિમ્પલ,
સરસ સરસ સરસ.
ત્યારે સમજાયું હતું.
ચલો, ફર્સ્ટ ક્લાસ. આનંદ થયો, આનંદ થયો. Shall I take your leave?
Again by thanking the most honorable CA Pradeep Bhai Kapasi sir for his valuable time and for his valuable speech, and thanking all the office bearers of all the association and all the stalwarts of AC Parikh and Company. I again thank you for the arrangement of this nice webinar.
એન્ડ પરીખ પણ અમે જોડાયા છો આપણી સાથે.
Yes, this nice webinar, and
My
now
pleasure.
we are taking all your leave. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
એન્ડ
Thank you.
પરીખનો
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you
Yes,
to
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
નયનભાઈ પરીખ છે ને?
નયનભાઈ છે કે?
હા છે નયનભાઈ.
નયન